Okay, in this video, I'm going to attempt to compile the most important parts of the 4 videos that I've done on the so-called Great American Eclipse so far, and also add some new stuff that I've come across since I put those videos out. And one of the main reasons that I'm doing this, I have listed here in my notes up on the screen, which is there are many people hyping up this Great American Eclipse X pattern in the context of rapture philosophy, meaning the end times, ideas like that. For example, there is an alleged Hebrew Aleph made with a third eclipse, and I have the image of that here, which you can see they added this in the same time period, and based on the combination of all 3 eclipses, they say, hey, this is very similar to the Hebrew Aleph, and that has the Alpha Omega type of biblical symbolism going on, and it's a sign from above of judgment coming to America, because the rapture philosophy embraces that kind of judgment coming to the world, because obviously the people believing this will be saved through their faith. So I'm not discounting this, but it was a little bit of a stretch to me when I compared the Hebrew Aleph to this pattern. But despite not being a biblical scholar, I do know that it tells you no man will know the day or the hour when it comes to these things. So making predictions about it is a pointless endeavor, because none of us are going to know the day or the time that something like that will go down. And history is littered with failed predictions along these lines. And the reason that the Bible gives that advice, I would assume, is that you will look like a fool and no one will listen to anything that you have to say after such a failed prediction. So you're better off not predicting anything along those lines. All of that aside, part of which I probably got wrong, because again, I'm not a biblical scholar, so take all of that with a massive grain of salt. I'm doing this video partially because I'm seeing a lot of this going on right now. A lot of posts are being made and a lot of videos are being made hinting at this eclipse as some kind of omen that is relating to the end of the world. And I want to go through everything in a methodical way so that there is at least one place you can go to remember that, oh no, this is pre-planned sorcery that's going on. I mean, I've never seen it so clear in anything except maybe 9/11, but that's related to this. And 9/11 was only in hindsight that we saw all of that surrounding the event. This, we're viewing it in real time. And the Donald Trump connection to these eclipses and his connection to 9/11 and the destruction of America, symbolically speaking, is unbelievable. I mean, there's so much to this. Accordingly, I want to do this video and put it in that context only so there's a record of it. And you can point somebody to this when April 8th comes and goes, and there's most likely no huge destructive world-ending event on any kind of scale like that, and then people want to throw it out. Oh, that was another failed prediction. Oh, everybody who was talking about that eclipse in 2024 and the one in 2017 and the X, that was all just another bunk prediction that was disproven when nothing happened. See, that's what always goes on. I'm trying to have a place in existence where you can go to and say, oh yeah, that actually was real. There was a lot to that that didn't involve any kind of worldly destruction, because we're in the realm of the subconscious mind and the way that sorcerers influence it and steer us in certain directions. It's a part of the whole silence is consent thing in the law. Hey, we put it all out there and you guys were silent and just let it happen, therefore you consented to it. Again, Satan, quote unquote, however you want to refer to what is in control here, is a lawyer. Remember this always. But before going forward along those lines, part of the destructive element of this narrative is people pointing towards the fact that the X pattern that the two eclipses make cross each other right here in southern Illinois, and this is right over the New Madrid fault zone, which is one of the most active fault zones in the entire world, but especially in America. And you can see here, this is southern Illinois, right where the two eclipses cross each other, and you have the New Madrid seismic zone. And when you go back into the history of Saros 145, which is the series that these eclipses are from in 2017 and 2024, you can see that we had two Saros 145 eclipses that were very similar to these in and around 1811 and 1812 when this gigantic earthquake transpired in the New Madrid fault zone. Obviously, the implication being that, hey, maybe something similar will happen this time around. And it could. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a geologist or a seismologist or any of the fields of study that would know about these kinds of things. The only thing I know is that when I went and looked into the activity of this fault zone, the U.S. government website stated that earthquakes on the level of those in 1811 and 1812 most likely happened in 2350 BC, 900 AD, and 1450 AD, based on how they were able to look at the sand deposits below the land and how that's indicative of giant quakes like what they saw in 1811 and 1812, which are magnitude 7 to 8 earthquakes. And based on their study of the evidence, there's an earthquake on that level about every 500 years during the past 1200 years. This is 2024, so let's say we're about 212 years since the last earthquakes, meaning based on this pattern, there's still about 300 years to go to when we would expect to see another earthquake on this level in the New Madrid fault zone. Obviously, that doesn't mean that it won't transpire. It's definitely a possibility, but I think most likely, given this historical evidence, it is unlikely that we will see anything along those lines in or around this April 8th, 2024 eclipse. So, now that I actually have that out of the way, let's get into the important stuff here. Ritual-controlled demolition of the United States of America, 9/11/2001 Donald Trump, and the 2017-2024 Great American Eclipse. Like I alluded to earlier, 9/11 is just a complete rabbit hole in and of itself. And you could spend your entire life making videos about it and connecting all of the dots that surrounded it. Obviously, I can't get into it on that level in a recording like this where I'm going to cover so much other stuff. But I'm going to assume that most of you are familiar with that anyway, and I wouldn't need to go too deep into it. But just in case it's your first time hearing any of this, just broadly speaking, as a ritual, 9/11 was the symbolic destruction of the quote-unquote old world order led by the United States of America post-World War II, where we have the Twin Tower World Trade Center destroyed and one World Trade Center rises in its place, which is symbolic of the quote-unquote New World Order that will be a multipolar world order with centralized supranational control when it's all said and done. And as we will see going forward, Donald Trump in particular is intimately tied in to 9/11 and these eclipses that occurred during his presidency and the rise of the movement that he created. Also, just a note that in the context of this long-term planning, One World Trade Center symbolically depicted the needle associated with the pre-planned COVID-19 pandemic, which disrupted the quote-unquote old world order supply chains and economic systems, obviously creating the impetus to make new supply chains and a new economic system in its place. In addition to creating the opportunity for digital technology integration that will culminate in a worldwide carbon footprint and social credit score system. Now, getting to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the personification of the 9/11 ritual, or the destruction of the quote-unquote old world order and creation of the quote-unquote new world order infused into the symbolism surrounding a president. Trump was born a Gemini during a blood moon eclipse in 1946. As an eclipse baby moon child, quote-unquote, his energy is amplified by eclipses. Interestingly, there was the Babylon Working in 1946, the same year of Trump's birth, by L. Ron Hubbard, who later created Scientology, and Jack Parsons, who later was involved in the creation of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which later became NASA, where they allegedly tried to create a moonchild via this ritual, which is very interesting in the context of Aleister Crowley, who wrote a book titled Moonchild. And as I went into in the prior video on Donald Trump where I covered this, the plot of the story involves black magicians, quote unquote, dueling with white magicians, quote unquote, and it surrounds the idea of creating this child that will lead to victory, as it were. And hopefully eventually you'll be able to see the parallel there to what Donald Trump is in relationship to their overall agenda and how he is the moonchild in that respect. Now, along those lines, this is one of those things that I probably shouldn't even say because I haven't double-checked this on my own. But allegedly, the moonchild ritual was timed specifically to coincide with the exact moment of a blood moon eclipse over Egypt between the horns of Taurus. And remember that as we go further into the information about this eclipse and what's going on in southern Illinois, which is referred to as Little Egypt. And then obviously in relationship to 9/11, where the Twin Towers were brought down, Donald Trump was born as the moonchild under the sign of Gemini, which is the twins in astrology terms. So then you have Donald Trump's direct connection to films that infused this 9/11 symbolism. First, Donnie Darko, where dark O is an eclipse, right? It's the dark O that comes over the sun. So you have this character named Donnie J. Darko in relationship to Donald Trump, which infuses Trump into the fabric of the film. And I went deeper into that in the video on Donald Trump Moonchild, where I go over all these subtle references to Donald Trump that are contained in the Donnie Darko film. But he's more obviously infused into the Back to the Future trilogy through the character Biff Tannen, which the writers admit was based on Donald Trump. And it's interesting how Biff Tannen is the foil to the protagonist in that trilogy. He's kind of the quote-unquote enemy, which is how they are portraying Donald Trump and his role in creating the chaos needed as the enemy through which they can build the quote-unquote New World Order. Destroying America, symbolically speaking, also literally in many ways, but bringing America down in a ritualistic way so that a new system can be built around it that America is a part of, as opposed to the empire that is driving what is happening in the world. In other words, Donald Trump, as the personification of the 9/11 ritual, is the Gemini man, the moonchild born under the sign of Gemini, because his rise and eventual destruction mirrors the rise and destruction of the Twin Towers themselves. So they are interrelated in the ritual in this way. Which is why Donald Trump is so closely tied to 9/11, symbolically speaking. And again, I'll assume most of you are familiar with the 9/11 infusion into the Back to the Future trilogy, and you're familiar with how that is encoded into the film and how that relates to the screen in particular, where the DeLorean is constantly traveling into aspects of film technology, whether it's a photo booth, a movie theater, or an outdoor drive-in movie screen. Or finally, at the end of part 3, into your screen that you're viewing, the train flies into it, which is interesting as it relates to other train symbolism that we'll get to later. But that is tied to the 9/11 symbolism of the monolith being metaphorically the movie screen at Ground Zero on 9/11, the Millennium Hilton, which ties in 2001: A Space Odyssey, the phone number at the Millennium Hilton, the original 1993 bombing, and later the ritual on 9/11, and how 2001: A Space Odyssey came out in 1968, which is when they began construction on the North Tower, and that is when 911 became the emergency phone number in the United States of America. And this is kind of what I was getting at. For those of you who don't know about the 9/11 rabbit hole, it's a deep one, and there's a lot to it. But Back to the Future infused all of that into the trilogy. You have various references to 9/11 on digital stopwatches. Twin Pines Mall becomes Lone Pine Mall, where you have the 2 trees turn into the 1 tree. You have the flaming 9/11 that is in the street as the DeLorean time travels into the movie theater where the Atomic Kid is playing. But getting back to Donald Trump, during his actual presidency, which remember started in 2017, the year of the first so-called Great American Eclipse on August 21st, 2017, he was responsible for Operation Warp Speed, which has this time dilation or acceleration resonance lining up with the themes of Donnie Darko and Back to the Future, which have those similar time travel, time dilation, parallel dimension themes. So Donald Trump is responsible for Operation Warp Speed, quote unquote, both literally as it related to the vaccine and symbolically as it related to being the catalyst for the further destruction of the United States of America during his Moonchild presidency, and after via his domestic terrorist, quote-unquote, followers. In other words, the MAGA movement that he created that has outlasted his presidency, and then that connection altogether to what has transpired in the period between 2017 and now 2024. Donnie Darko premiered at Sundance on 1/19/2001, 9/11/2001, okay, which is the same month, incidentally, that there was the mysterious monolith that appeared in Seattle. And returning to the Back to the Future stuff, you have the clock at Twin Pines Mall set to 1:16 a.m. or 9/11, and then when he comes back to Lone Pine Mall and the clock says 1:33, there's 17 minutes between those two events. It just so happens that the North Tower was hit by a plane allegedly at 8:46 a.m., and the South Tower was hit at 9:03 a.m., and there's 17 minutes between those two events, if you can believe that. On top of which, Q is the 17th letter of the alphabet, and Q can symbolically be viewed as an eclipse, where you have the line that goes into the circle kind of representing that last ray of light that is appearing as the sun is eclipsed. In other words, Trump seems to be the personification of the controlled demolition of America. He is the twin, quote unquote, the Gemini man of the event that happened on September 11, 2001, or the symbolic 17 minutes between the two events. Again, Trump being associated with Q, the 17th letter of the alphabet, who became president in 2017, right? The same year as this great American eclipse, the first leg of it. What are the odds of that? In a recent tweet, Scott Adams stated, "I finally figured out what is wrong with everything. It's a system problem. The introduction of Trump into the systems broke almost everything and in multiple ways." And I put below that, by design. Of course, that was his role. That was the design of his presidency and everything they associated with it. The domestic terrorist, conspiracy theorist president who broke everything, who didn't adhere to any of the norms of the office, and who now is stimulating the use of the quote-unquote justice system in a way that it has never been used against political institutions and those who represent it. And we'll get to that later. Again, the first path of totality for the Great American Eclipse was on April 21st, 2017, during the first year of Donald Trump's presidency. The Charlottesville rally on August 11th to the 12th, 2017, 10 days before the first 2017 eclipse, amplified by Trump's quote-unquote mood child energy, was the official shift into the quote-unquote white nationalist domestic terrorist narrative that Trump's MAGA would come to represent in combination with QAnon. This is what is referred to as the Unite the Right rally. Incidentally, a couple months after the Unite the Right rally, in the context of the August 21st Great American Eclipse in 2017, the first QAnon post was made on 4chan in October of 2017. Again, remembering all of this is happening during the first year of Donald Trump's presidency. So you go back to this image of the two eclipses, and you have the path in August of 2017, and in that context, we're thinking of all of the things that were attributed to Donald Trump while this was going on in the first year of his presidency. The Unite the Right rally, as it related to the beginning of the MAGA domestic terrorist narrative, in conjunction with QAnon starting its PSYOP in October of 2017, where Q is the 17th letter of the alphabet and can be viewed symbolically as an eclipse. Donald Trump was elected in the early morning hours of 11/9/16, or 9/11, and 1/19/21 was also the last day of Trump's term 4 years later. This happens for every president because Inauguration Day is the 20th of January, but it carries a little extra weight here as it relates to Donald Trump because, of course, you have 9/11 and 2 and 1. In addition to the fact that this Moonchild president was elected on 9/11, given his connection to everything that that event symbolized and everything that was infused about that event into film, which goes well beyond Back to the Future and Donnie Darko, but those two films in particular relate to Donald Trump specifically. We additionally have the coincidence that the COVID-19 pandemic was planned for the middle of Donald Trump's domestic terrorist, conspiracy theorist, quote-unquote, presidency in the context of the ritual destruction of the United States of America, because the term misinformation, quote-unquote, gained prominence in 2020 and led to mass censorship from social media companies to protect the population from dangerous, quote-unquote, medical misinformation, effectively bypassing the First Amendment without legal challenge. Go figure that this was planned at the midpoint of these two eclipses during the Donald Trump presidency, in the sense that they could add the idea of misinformation online to all of the things that the climate denying, anti-science, backwards, white nationalist, domestic terrorist MAGA followers were promoting on the internet. Now they had something tangible they could point to. Hey, these people on the internet are actually endangering lives. They need to be dealt with. We need to censor them. And in this way, I hope you see how they use vehicles like Donald Trump to create the conditions to advance their overall agenda, because part of censoring in this way is starting the idea that it is acceptable in the context of a social credit score, where if you say the wrong thing that goes against the current thing, we deduct points from you and kick you out of society. No coincidence that Donald Trump led that kind of thing into existence, given what they associated with him and given his symbolic role in all of this during this specific period in time. Now, check this out. Exactly halfway between August 21st, 2017 and April 8th, 2024, the date December 14th, 2020, the product of Trump's Operation Warp Speed, the first mRNA COVID vaccine was administered to a person in the United States. Incredibly, a total solar eclipse took place on December 14th, 2020, when the Earth passed between the moon and the sun, which also happened to be a Monday, or a moon day. Now, what are the odds of that? That in the exact midpoint between August 21st, 2017 and April 8th, 2024, the Moonchild president, Donald Trump, creates Operation Warp Speed, and it culminates in the first mRNA shot on a day where there was an actual total solar eclipse, which is what Donald Trump was born under. Okay. What are the odds of that? And this really exemplifies what I'm referring to when I say that him being the Moonchild amplifies eclipses, and so they coordinate the agenda to have certain things going on that will amplify their effect. So you take the Moonchild president on a total solar eclipse day, and then you have him introduce this new thing that you really want to spread to the rest of the population. You're amplifying its reach and effects in a propaganda sense. Because his energy is infused with the ability to make that kind of thing more piercing. Donald Trump then allegedly breaks the USA election system, quote unquote, by inspiring insurrection, quote unquote. Sorry, I have to do so many quote unquotes here, but hopefully you understand why. At the USA Capitol building on January 6th, 2021, thus solidifying the Trump MAGA domestic terrorist, quote unquote, narrative. What seems like thousands of news headlines have warned about this increasing, quote unquote, threat since January 6th, where domestic terrorists, quote unquote, are said to have been radicalized, quote unquote, online via, quote unquote, misinformation. Hopefully that's the end of the quotes for a while. But I hope you see how the J6 event amplified that misinformation problem that COVID started. To where not only are they endangering lives in a medical sense, now they're endangering actual people's lives in a terroristic sense, in a governmental sense. Hey, now these people are being radicalized online to try and destroy our institutions of government. This is a serious problem. Look at what all of these people are doing because of all this misinformation. We really have to take care of this. On June 20th, 2020, The Atlantic released the documentary White Noise, a film that covers three alt-right white nationalist figures, Richard Spencer, Mike Cernovich, and Lauren Southern. And I have a picture of the cover of this documentary, which you can see here, White Noise making the 666 OK sign, and the I as well, tells you everything you need to know about The Atlantic and this documentary, and tells you everything you need to know about the role these fake white nationalist people are playing in the agenda. Because the three people that this documentary covered are no different than Donald Trump. They're just playing their role in a different, less popular way. A little over 2 years later then, you have on December 30th, 2022, another film called White Noise released by Netflix. The plot centers around a Hitler studies professor, and the town is impacted by a train crash that creates a giant cloud filled with toxic chemicals that they all have to escape. And interestingly, this is one of the posters for that White Noise film. And it's just kind of interesting how in the context of the plot of the film, yeah, they're all looking at the toxic cloud. But in the context of White Noise and the Eclipse, which we'll get to, it's kind of showing that last moment before the sun is completely occluded, where you have that red hue, like they showed in Leave the World Behind. How the sun gets that red hue when it's eclipsed, or right before it's totally eclipsed. So they're evoking that color in the sky as everyone looks up at the sky. And I'm sure there's some reason they show these two helicopters here that is escaping my perception. But as I go deeper into this, you'll kind of see why this was the imagery that they chose. Just 2 months later, on February 3rd, 2023, a train derails in East Palestine, Ohio, spills chemicals, and creates a giant plume of toxic smoke. Oh, I just remembered, allegedly they pronounce it as East Palestine, as opposed to Palestine. I can't help but read that word and see Palestine, but East Palestine is so close to where they filmed White Noise that some people living in East Palestine were extras in the film, which is just unbelievable, right? They filmed this White Noise movie in a town right next to East Palestine, so much so to the point where there were actual extras sourced from East Palestine that would be in this movie that was about a train crash that created a toxic plume of smoke that essentially poisoned everyone in the town and they had to flee, right? And then you have this exact same thing happen in real life in East Palestine, Ohio, 2 months later. And the rivers / streams in East Palestine, Ohio eventually filter into the Ohio River, and the Ohio River becomes a tributary of the Mississippi River directly south of Cairo, Illinois. And if you go back to the map here, East Palestine is right up here in northeast Ohio, and its rivers and streams filters into the Ohio River, which comes all the way down here on the border of Ohio and West Virginia and Kentucky. And then it comes all the way down and filters into the Mississippi River here in southern Illinois in a town called Cairo, Illinois. And this will be very interesting as it relates to the Nile River, which likewise splits just north of Cairo, Egypt. But symbolically speaking, the point is the water from East Palestine that was polluted by this toxic spill eventually filters into the Mississippi River right below Cairo, Illinois. Cairo, Illinois is located in what is known as Little Egypt, which contains Giant City State Park and Garden of the Gods, in addition to the Cahokia Mounds. The mound builders encoded earthworks with celestial alignments that rival the alignments contained within the Great Pyramids at Giza. Little Egypt also contains the town of Carbondale, Illinois. Carbondale is located directly on the center line of the April 8th, 2024 eclipse, and was also on the center line of the August 21st, 2017 eclipse. Carbondale, Illinois is where the center of the X forms over the USA between the two 2017-2024 eclipses. So right here, this is Little Egypt, Cairo, and Carbondale, Illinois, but specifically the X is right over Carbondale. So obviously, East Palestine being near the path of totality in the 2024 eclipse, and then symbolically feeding into the path of totality of the 2017 eclipse, you can see how Palestine would likely be a part of the news scripting that was going on during this window between 2017 and 2024, these two eclipses and the role of America in the rest of the world. And sure enough, on October 7th, 2023, Israel, quote-unquote, derails east into Palestine. You see what they did there, right? But put another way, there is a war that breaks out between Israel and Hamas, which brings the USA by proxy into an extremely unpopular conflict, in addition to the continued pre-existing forced proxy participation in Ukraine. both of which are politically destabilizing the United States in a variety of ways. Not a coincidence that this transpires in this window of time when all of this other stuff is going on as it relates to bringing down the United States of America in a ritualistic way. In other words, bringing down America as a part of a plan in the same way that they brought down those Twin Towers as a part of the plan of building them in the first place, in a ritualistic way. Again, silence is consent, legally speaking, and there is power in conducting rituals that we react with in silence and allow them to do everything they want to do through. We give away our power by believing that the event is something else other than a ritual designed to siphon our energy and use it for its own ends. That's what a sorcerer is, okay? That's what they're doing. The August 21st, 2017 eclipse also exited the USA at the Isle of Palm, South Carolina, and South Carolina's flag has a palm tree on it as well as imagery that could be viewed as an eclipse. I went over this in one of the prior videos, but I'll bring it up now so you can see. Here's the palm tree and here's the eclipse imagery. The moon occluding the sun, even though officially speaking, they have a different explanation for what this is. Phoenix, quote unquote, was the name the father of botany, Theophrastus, gave the palm tree. Symbolically, a phoenix rises from the ashes in a rebirth or transformation. So you have the flag of South Carolina with this eclipse imagery and a palm tree, which can be viewed as a phoenix. And in the context of this first eclipse in 2017 and the plan for America, you have the symbolic phoenix exit of the 2017 eclipse. And as we'll get to in a little bit, then you have the symbolic entrance to the United States of America in 2024 in Eagle Pass, Texas, giving the same phoenix imagery. Quite literally referencing an eagle passing, or the ashes that the phoenix rises out of. But in general, just referring to a transformation of sorts symbolically. What are the odds that it enters the U.S. through Salem, Oregon in 2017, Salem being another word for Jerusalem, as it relates to the role that Jerusalem is now playing in the context of white noise, East Palestine, and the Israeli-Palestinian war that's going on. If you can even call that a war, I don't know. But it's pretty one-sided. That connection, along with the 7 Salems that the 2017 eclipse went through, in relationship to America's role in Israel and the fact that it exited at the Isle of Palms with the Phoenix symbolism and it enters in 2024 when this is all going on through Eagle Pass. Then this is more Donald Trump information as it relates to the Bank of America mural, which I also went over in the Moonchild video. And the Bank of America headquarters is in Charlotte, North Carolina. And Charlotte, North Carolina was just north of the Path of Totality in 2017, where you have this panel of the mural depicting what could be a young Donald Trump here in the realm of the mind, where all of this is symbolically taking place. And you have the eclipse tied to a cube, and you have the burning bush and the Egypt symbolism with the Great Pyramid back here. All of this kind of taking place in a dimension beyond the people who are just kind of pointing at the person that is representing all this. They're in a different dimension than where this is taking place, where the sorcery is taking place, right? Oh, and as it relates to this cube, which I'm sure symbolizes all kinds of other things, but the New Jerusalem is depicted as a cube as well, which kind of ties the whole thing together as it relates to the path of this eclipse in 2017, the Salems, Jerusalem, white noise, East Palestine, and everything that transpired along those lines as it relates to Donald Trump and the movement that he started in 2017. And that story might not be over if he somehow becomes president again and that war in Israel is still going on. So we'll just have to wait and see along those lines. But I'll get to that at the end too. Incidentally, the World Health Organization first coined the term disease X in 2018 before COVID-19 and is now again raising similar warnings on the edge of the April 8th, 2024 eclipse that will complete an X, quote unquote, over the USA. Again, just an interesting coincidence here that they've brought this idea of disease X into all of our minds through the news in the context of this X that is made by these two eclipses over the United States of America. In light of the fact that the first pandemic happened in the middle of these two eclipses. Then you have Elon Musk initiating the acquisition of Twitter on April 14th, 2022, completed October 27th, 2022. It's just interesting that it was April when that started, given that the 2024 eclipse is in April, of course. We learned that Twitter Inc. is officially renamed to X Corp in April of 2023. So a year later, in April as well, we learned that they changed it to X, which is interesting in the context of all this. Subsequently, Elon Musk begins to allow domestic terrorists, quote unquote, to spread disinformation, quote unquote, on X, which is often labeled now as a right-wing, white nationalist, quote unquote, platform, thus further associating the link between X and Trump MAGA in the context of Trump the Eclipse Moonchild, quote unquote, amplifier, and the 2017-2024 Great American X, quote unquote, eclipse. Maybe it would be better if I just enunciated the quoted words a little more so you know there's a quote there than saying quote unquote every time. I just realized it'll be hard for somebody listening to this and not watching to hear all those quote unquotes and still understand what I'm saying. Too far into it to go back and change now, though. I'm pot committed. November 16, 2023, Economist magazine releases a cover image of Donald Trump eclipsing the Earth. Did that work? Hopefully. That was quote unquote eclipsing. Economist magazine releases a cover image of Donald Trump eclipsing the Earth. And I'll bring that up here. This is the cover where they show his head eclipsing the Earth halfway, obviously going forward to America within the context of the title, The World Ahead 2024. And The Economist itself stated, the edition includes The World Ahead 2024, our 38th annual predictive guide to the coming year. In all that time, no single person has ever eclipsed our analysis as much as Mr. Trump eclipses 2024. I mean, there you go, right? Oh, and along those lines, I want to read this quote from Dick Cheney. In our nation's 246-year history, I don't know the year he said this, but apparently it was 246 years since 1776, there has never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump. Now read between the lines there, right? If you're at the base level thinking of it in terms of politics, you're thinking of it in terms of J6 and quote-unquote terrorism. But think of it symbolically as they mean it. In terms of the role of the Moonchild in the context of these eclipses, 9/11, and the future of the quote-unquote world order. Okay? He's the greatest threat to America because it was designed that way. So he's telling you the truth in a way that you won't understand it. Most likely. Just a few days after the Economist cover of Donald Trump eclipsing the Earth, November 22nd, 2023, we have Leave the World Behind limited theatrical release on the same day when JFK was assassinated in 1963. It just so happens that Saros 145 was active in 1963 and there was an eclipse on July 20th, the same year JFK was assassinated. The years that these Saros 145 eclipses take place usually correlate with the fall of a leader. Franklin Roosevelt died, a Russian prime minister was fired, and the downfall of former Yugoslavian Serbian president Slobodan Milosevic occurred. There was also assassination attempts on Ronald Reagan and William Taft during these eclipse years, And even JFK's son died in a plane crash, who was subsequently used as a part of the QAnon narrative, which started during Saros 145 eclipse year 2017. Funny how that works, right? Then you have this information I went into in the Leave the World Behind video. Coincidentally, right around the Netflix release of Leave the World Behind, you have Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson conduct an interview, bringing the other quote-unquote domestic terrorist back into the news, Alex Jones, who is right there on the same level with Donald Trump. Leave the World Behind is released the next day, which has the Eclipse cyber polygon resonance. And I already showed part of that scene from Leave the World Behind, but just to refresh your memory, here is the start of the eclipse as viewed from the moon. You have this tattered, old-looking United States flag looking at this scene, and then in the next frame, they show you the actual eclipse. This movie just coincidentally released December 8th, 2023, in the same window as all of this great American eclipse symbolism is going on, as it relates to the ritual destruction of the United States of America, given the plot shows that very thing happening via a cyber attack. And then Elon Musk reinstates Alex Jones to X a couple days after that. Then, about a week after that, you have the Colorado Supreme Court ruling that Trump is ineligible due to the 14th Amendment's insurrection clause. That's on December 19th, 2023. Then you have the culmination of all of Donald Trump's legal problems in 2023 and 2024. As I say here, Donald Trump, the Moonchild, Eclipse amplifier for the ritual destruction of the USA, had all of the following happen to him as the quote-unquote conspiracy theorist, misinformation, domestic terrorist president between 2017 and 2024. Number 1, the first president to ever be impeached twice. Number 2, allegedly created and led an insurrection in an act of domestic terrorism against democracy. Number 3, now faces 91 felony counts after being indicted 4 times. No former president has even come close to that kind of legal problems. Number 4, accused in Georgia, D.C. of plotting to overturn 2020 election loss. Number 5, accused in Florida of hoarding classified documents. Number 6, accused in New York of falsifying business records stemming from hush money payments made during 2016 campaign. Number 7, ordered to pay $350 million in a New York civil fraud trial ruling. And then number 8, Colorado Supreme Court in Maine attempted to remove Trump from the 2024 ballot. Hopefully you can see how his character was designed to do all of these things, or at least be presented in a way that he could be accused of all of these things for a very specific reason in the context of everything else that I've gone into so far. This is designed to weaken the credibility of the USA government and also provoke the Trump MAGA base into some kind of violent emotional reaction, or provide the plausible cover story for another false flag. Again, all coincidentally taking place during this very important eclipse window, given Trump's role as a 9/11 personified and a destructive chaos amplifier. And just to elaborate on the weakening of America institutionally speaking, not only is this dividing the population further, which has kind of always been done, so that's not so much of a big deal, but it's more of a big deal that the actual institutions, including the legal system, are targeting political opponents now as a form of ordinary business. And obviously that's something that people in the United States used to point at other countries and say, oh, look, that's very banana republic-esque. They're throwing the guy running for election into jail? What is going on here? And I hope you see that Trump is establishing the precedent for that kind of thing to become the norm, which will further destabilize America as a country. To the point where people will no longer even have the illusion that we have a functioning government that actually gives us a choice. And that's part of destroying the idea of America equaling freedom. Hey, we tried to give the people freedom, and look what they did with it. Look what was allowed to happen. Then you have this absolute bananas thing that transpired where the April 8th, 2024 eclipse will enter the USA through Eagle Pass, Texas. This is the path of the 2024 totality. And down here you see Eagle Pass, Texas is the first town that it enters through, which is just a truly outrageous quote-unquote coincidence, given the fact that this is the exact place where the much publicized border standoff has been initiated between the U.S. government and Texas. Various psyops have attempted to create domestic terrorist quote-unquote momentum in Eagle Pass, various convoys and all the other glowy type stuff that they try to create along those lines has been tried down there. And I think people are finally starting to realize what's going on, and they're having a lot of difficulty creating that momentum now. As one astrologer put it, the interesting thing about this eclipse is how its pathway literally draws a line over the United States from one corner to the other. Symbolically, this could represent the sharp division between the U.S. citizens and has been brewing since the rise of Trump. Again, by design. In October 2016, I personally predicted that Trump was going to win the election because of this dividing pathway, while also considering the alignment with his chart and Regulus. Or, in other words, Trump, the dividing pathway through the Eagle Pass. And we'll get back to the Regulus stuff before I end the video. And then you have this Pluto connection. In astrological terms, one of our handy timekeepers for deep long-term changes is plucky little dwarf planet with a bit of heart, Pluto. Thanks to his 248-year orbit, he returns to exactly the same place he was in the sky when the United States was born in 1776 in just a few years in 2024. Yet another coincidence, astrologically speaking, where Pluto was in this place in the sky in 1776 that it is now returning to on the heels of these two so-called great American eclipses and all of the transformation as it relates to America that they have symbolically embedded into Trump and his role in those eclipses as the Moonchild eclipse baby. On top of that, you have this 1776 revolution / transformation energy returning in 2024. So the 2024 election script in this context is wide open. It doesn't really matter which way they take it. There are many different things that could be sold to the population based on what they have created up until this point, propaganda-wise. For example, number one, Trump somehow is kept off the ballot. It's easy to plausibly sell a reaction to that injustice as it very logically carries over from the quote-unquote insurrection, election interference narrative, right? If they somehow kick Trump off the ballots and he's not able to run for president, you could really get the propaganda rolling that people want to react with violence to that because they feel like their voice is not being heard again now. Not only was there election interference, but now they won't even let him on the ballot. This is some evil plan from the Democratic deep state to keep us down, right? You know how they sell it in those divisive terms. For example, when the Colorado Supreme Court thing happened and they attempted to keep him off the primary ballot, Vice News runs with the headline, "We need to start killing. Trump's far-right supporters are threatening civil war." I mean, there you go, right? That's exactly what they would do in the scenario where Trump is somehow kept off the ticket to run in the actual election in November. So that would be an easy one, no problem. Then two, as a variation, you have Trump kept on the ballot, but Biden wins. At which point, the same reaction is plausible, as even the dumbest people in America realize our votes don't count. when they try to sell the nobody is worse than Trump narrative to hundreds of millions of people who didn't vote for Biden. I mean, he has one of the worst approval ratings of all time at this point, and no one is realistically going to vote for him except for the most far gone of all of the people, who have Trump derangement syndrome, literally, and they just will not vote for Trump if that's their only other option. So they'll put their vote down for Biden. But other than that, no one's going to vote for this guy, and it'll be impossible for them to sell that to anybody. So if they do go that route and try to sell it, then they've just completely laid all their cards on the table, and they're like, yeah, America's over. We're not counting your votes anymore. That illusion's gone. We never did, especially since electronic voting started, but, we're not even going to give you that illusion anymore. And in reaction to that, you could get the same Vice type of headlines as support for some kind of J6 2.0 event, which of course results in Patriot Act 2.0 legislation. And then 3, you have Trump wins, actually. He's allowed to stay on the ticket. He wins and does the standard bait and switch for 4 years while providing cover for Israel to continue its war, possibly allowing the context for a Hamas event in the USA, which will be said to be backed by Iran. So Trump wins, he fully supports Israel and allows that war to continue, and then in response to that, they orchestrate a similar event to 9/11 where it's blamed on Hamas, and then they throw in Iran for good measure to justify some kind of further expansion in the Middle East there. And then also I just noted here, they could also try a J6 2.0 at the end of his presidency in this scenario if Trump tried to force a third term. You could imagine him saying, well, I'm going to defeat the deep state and I'm going to stay in office past the 2 terms that I'm supposed to be limited to. And that could create civil war type of conditions, or symbolically it would do that in the sense of our institutions in America and how they are supposed to function. And then 4 here, one of Trump or Biden doesn't even make it to the election, and they take the script in a completely different direction with different characters. Either way, it's wide open. They can take it in any direction based on what they have built into the historical narrative up until this point. And then the last thing I just have listed here is that, coincidentally, in light of everything I've gone over, we have the path of totality for the Great American Eclipse in 2024 on April 8th in just under 2 months. We're only a few weeks away from this eclipse now, and on April 12th, 2024, you have the release of the film Civil War in theaters. The film follows a team of journalists who travel across the United States during a rapidly escalating second civil war that has engulfed the entire nation. What are the odds, in the context of everything else I've gone over, that this film with those themes is being released 4 days after this eclipse? And you add that on to things that Donald Trump says, and you can kind of get an idea about how they're creating that narrative, right? Donald Trump here, these thugs and radical left monsters have just indicted, which he spelled wrong as indicated, the 45th president of the United States of America and the leading Republican candidate by far for the 2024 nomination for president. This is an attack on our country, the likes of which has never been seen before. It is likewise a continuing attack on our once free and fair elections. The USA is now a third world nation, a nation in serious decline, so said. So you can see how he's promoting this narrative. And if they go with one of those scenarios I was referring to as it relates to our election in 2024, they have easily built up the foundation for people to react in a violent way. Or at least they could sell that, right? In one of their operations. Or psyops. But in that context, really interesting that Civil War is scheduled to be released on April 12th, 2024. And this is a part of the narrative that they build along those lines, right? This is the film Sound of Freedom that was released last year, and you have Jim Caviezel and Donald Trump all in the same space talking about this issue. They're supposedly freeing the world from this stuff when all of it is still going on and nothing has happened along those lines, and they're all just playing their role. But In terms of propaganda, you have all of these American flags, and just the way that they're selling this idea of who they are and who they represent is contributing to what Donald Trump is saying in that tweet as it relates to civil war and the breakdown of the United States of America, either overtly or symbolically. And then this is what someone showed on Reddit that I got into in a prior video, but I didn't have this image up, where they show you how it's the square and compass that is the new X logo, which is appropriate symbolism for the role that X is playing as a, quote, far-right platform, a, quote, domestic terrorist platform, as it relates to the X that these two eclipses make, and as the eclipses relate to Donald Trump's role in the ritual destruction of America, which was created by Freemasons in the first place. So you come full circle with this Masonic symbolism on X and the role that it is playing in this scripted theater production. And speaking of scripted sorcery and symbolism, I just wanted to read a little bit of a comment, or part of a comment, that someone left on one of the old videos on this subject. Each age has a polarized aspect linked to the breath. One age positive, next age negative. In breath, out breath. What we do, the universe does, as within, so without. In between each breath is a pause. The pause symbol is also two towers, which is very interesting, right? In the context of 9/11, they construct these two towers that can be viewed as the pause symbol. If you imagine that in your mind, what the pause symbol looks like on a remote control, for example. And that's where we have been on the galactic timeline for the past 20-something years, right? Symbolically, they pressed pause when they destroyed those two towers, in addition to all the other symbolic threads that were woven into that ritual. In what is known as a fermata in music, there is a pause where the conductor holds all the pieces in place for an indeterminate amount of time until everything is set, and then the breath of the ages, quote unquote, is blown back in the other direction. And what I found really interesting too, in the context of what this commenter was saying, is that a fermata, in an abstract way, is an eclipse. If you view this white half sphere as merging into this black half sphere, and then you get the results ultimately, which is the occluded sun, or the darkness, the black dot that you see when there's an eclipse. So you have this symbolic pause being hit in music theory, and then you kind of have the next phase of it being symbolized by these eclipses from Saros 145 over the United States of America from 2017 to 2024. In relationship to the Moonchild president who amplified all of this eclipse energy, which is why he has been front and center since 2017 until now, as I speak, and going forward. It's all about the Donald. Now, anyone reading the news understands that President Trump enjoys being at the center of attention. Well, the Great American Eclipse is certainly part of the script to make America great, and Trump may have been the man destined to make it happen. For starters, the August 21st eclipse occurs conjunct the fixed star Regulus. As the lion's heart of the constellation Leo, Regulus since ancient times has been associated with kings and kingship. A solar eclipse conjunct Regulus would have been an omen for the fall of the king, and most certainly not news a court astrologer would have wanted to deliver to his royal patron. And if that weren't enough, the Great American Eclipse falls directly on the point that was rising over the horizon at the moment of President Trump's birth, assuming the birth certificate released by the campaign is accurate. This rising degree is one of the most pivotal points in a horoscope, aka a birth chart, one that changes every 4 minutes as the Earth turns. So an eclipse on this star of kings, especially when it falls so precisely on the birth chart of the leader of the country over which the eclipse occurs, becomes the astrological equivalent of a Vegas-style flashing neon sign. Oh, and by the way, let's not forget, President Trump was born on the day of a lunar eclipse. So as an eclipse baby himself, he's even more sensitive to their triggering influence. So accordingly, you have the ritual controlled demolition of the USA that weaves together 9/11, Donald Trump, and the 2017-2024 Great American Eclipses in a very obvious symbolic way.